Speaker is Gian Wild. I'm going to read from here because I spent a good half hour researching and writing this. So, Gian Wild is an accessibility industry veteran, having started back in 1998. She spent 6 years with the W3C Web Content and Accessibility Guidelines Working Group and other associated groups, contributing to the development of WCAG 2. Gian speaks at web and accessibility conferences throughout the world. Additionally, she has spoken at the United Nations on the importance of accessibility. She is presently CEO of Accessibility Oz, based in Australia. Please give a warm Chicago welcome to Gian Wild.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very loud. Can everyone hear me at the back? Or let me know if you can't hear me. We actually incorporated in the US a year and 9 days ago. So we're actually a US company as well. After that introduction, I feel like there's nothing left that I can actually do. But I have some great clients here in the US, and I'm really glad to be here in Chicago. And thanks to Dennis for organising this. So if you want to have access to tonight's presentation, you can go to a11yoz.com/2016mobile, and that has the presentation. You can actually look at it while I'm presenting if you want and take notes. Now, unfortunately, the system that I'm using is not accessible to screen readers, but if you'd like a copy of the presentation, an accessible PowerPoint presentation, just tweet me at Accessibility Oz or come up and see me afterwards, and I'll send you the accessible PowerPoint. That address again is a11yoz.com/2016mobile or mobile. This is my team in Australia about a year ago. We've probably doubled in size. When I started Accessibility Oz in 2011, I had a mission statement, which was to make the world a more accessible place, and also to actively hire people with disabilities. And I wanted to target a percentage of my staff to have, 20% of my staff to have disabilities. So at the moment, we're actually at 80%. So we actively hire people with disabilities. If you have we have 2 candidates and they have the same experiences, we hire the person with the disability. In some cases where we have a person without the adequate experience but they have a disability, we hire them anyway. We do really want to, do what we preach. It's also something that we do with our products. We have 3 products, OzArt, OzWiki and OzPlayer, and they're all fully accessible. We don't release anything unless it's fully accessible. So in terms of my staff, we've got people who use speech-to-text programs, on-screen magnifiers, keyboard-only screen readers. We've got people who have epilepsy. I get migraines. Both of those can be triggered by flickering content on websites. And people with fibromyalgia and dyslexia. So we've got a whole range of different groups of people with disabilities. So the reason why I'm telling you all that is that it's not just about vision impairments. A lot of people think that web accessibility is about vision impairments and specifically say, IE and JAWS, and it's actually a lot bigger than that. So just because your site is screen reader accessible doesn't mean it's necessarily fully accessible. In terms of our services, we do everything. That's web accessibility or digital accessibility. And as I said, we've got 3 products. We were a reseller for Browserloud. I don't know why it's still there. OzPlayer, which is the fully accessible video player, which has just been purchased by CCC Tech Center. So all California community colleges now use OzPlayer. OzArt, our automated accessibility testing tool. And OzWiki, our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code, and solutions. And if you want to give me your email address at the end of the session, I can actually give you 1 month's access to OzWiki. We've got over 1,000 examples. A lot of the examples you see here today come from OzWiki. In terms of mobile, there are a bunch of different accessibility features that people rely on when it comes to mobile. There are native screen readers like TalkBack on Android, Narrator on Windows for those 3 people using Windows phones, VoiceOver on iOS. There's text-to-speech, speech recognition, volume control, visual, auditory, and vibrational notifications, haptic keyboard, which vibrates when you change things, and Zoom. So there's a whole range of different things that people can do to make a website more accessible on a mobile device. The system accessibility settings are things like font size, touch and hold delay, screen rotation, high contrast, assistive touch, and mono audio. One of the best things that you can do to test your mobile app or your mobile site is to pinch zoom and see if you can use the site. The other thing is turn it onto landscape mode and see whether you can use it. You'll be surprised the number of apps that crash as soon as you move into landscape mode. Now, when it comes to web accessibility, everyone knows about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but they don't specifically cover mobile sites. So, for example, WCAG 2 requires that everything be keyboard accessible, but it doesn't require that everything be mouse accessible, and it doesn't require that everything be touch accessible. So you could have a site that meets WCAG 2, but actually can't be used on a mobile device. So the working group is addressing this at the moment, and they're talking about releasing a WCAG 2.1, but it won't be released until 2018. So, obviously we still need to build websites and web apps between now and then. So we've come up with our own mobile methodology. It's based on WCAG 2. It's also based on the BBC Mobile Accessibility Guidelines, which are an absolutely excellent resource. Just be aware that the BBC wrote it for internal use, and BBC is obviously not a for-profit system. There's not stuff about e-commerce and things like that. So let's talk about mobile usage. In 2014, people started spending more time on their mobile devices than on desktops. So mobile is everywhere. Mobile is ubiquitous. WebAIM does this great screen reader survey every year, and it peaked in January 2014. The 82% of people who use screen readers also use the screen readers on their mobile devices. It's gone down a little, but that's because they widened the number of people that accessed that particular survey. So, someone who's vision impaired, don't assume that they're just going to access your site on a desktop. In fact, we work with the National Federation for the Blind, and they said to us, often we actually look at websites only on a mobile because we don't need a big computer, we don't need a big screen, we can't see it. So we just plug in our little headphones to our mobile, and then when we get a mobile-only site and no way to jump back to the desktop site, we don't know that we're missing stuff that might be on the desktop. So this is the energy rating site that we worked on a couple of years back, and it did not have a responsive site. It was not friendly on the mobile. It looked exactly the same on the mobile as it did on the desktop, except much, much smaller, and it was impossible to use. But even so, 19% of people who visited that website used a mobile or tablet to do so. So when we redeveloped the site and turned it into a responsive site, that jumped to 30%. So even if a site is terrible, terrible to use on a mobile, people are still going to use a mobile to access it. Compared to Consumer Affairs Victoria, that have always had a separate MDOT site, and they were at 30% in January 2014, and they are still now. So let's talk about mobile-specific issues. So PDFs are probably one of the biggest problems with mobile, because you open a PDF and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then you get something that looks like that. Those people who can't see it, looks terrible. It's tiny text, it doesn't reflow, colour contrast is bad. It's page 2 of 108. Can you imagine scrolling with your finger, 108 pages? And you can't search, might be an image, it's terrible. PDFs are terrible. I have a whole presentation about it. Versus something like this, HTML. It resizes, you can pinch zoom, colour contrast can be changed easily, etc. And then, you know, even maybe a separate m.dot site. So this is a responsive site actually, and so you can see much easier to use than your standard PDF. Remember, when it comes to mobile and PDFs are larger file sizes than HTML. You've got a slower connection on a mobile, and so what that means is that it takes longer for your users to download your content. It also increases their data usage, so it equals unhappy participants. So you should really consider being really friendly to mobile, and so actually having something like a separate m.dot site. So this is the energy rating site before we looked at it, and then, you know, nice big icons, easy to use, etc. And another example, energy rating is kind of like your Energy Star. Other issues we see are autoplay. Autoplay is incredibly inaccessible. It's one of the biggest accessibility failures of all time. There are 4 non-interference clauses in WCAG 2 that you absolutely must not fail. Autoplay is one of them. So this is actually Jamie Oliver's recipe mobile app. And when you open it for the first time, it takes you to your native mobile video player and automatically plays a video. Doesn't have any captions, doesn't have any audio descriptions, doesn't have any way to easily know where you are or to go back. So this is a really, really serious issue, so don't do this. The other thing you don't want to do is this movement. So slideshows are really annoying on a desktop. If you're not sure about whether you should use a slideshow, look at shouldiuseacarousel.com. But it's even more annoying on a mobile, because often if people provide pause buttons, they don't on a mobile because they have less room. But on a mobile, it takes up a lot more space. So compared to the space that you have on a desktop. So slideshows are incredibly problematic when it comes to mobile. So you must have a pause button. There are a whole bunch of things that you need to do if you're going to have slideshows on mobile, and I do have an article that I've written about that. We also were commissioned to create an accessible slideshow to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in Australia, and they've released it under Creative Commons. So it's a Drupal module and a WordPress plugin. If you're interested, feel free to get in contact with us. Other issues are traps, and we see traps a lot more in mobile than we do in desktop. So one of the big things is the on-screen keyboard trap, which is where the keyboard remains visible no matter what you do. So even if you're on a field, you need to have the ability to dismiss the keyboard, because the keyboard takes up almost half the real estate of your mobile phone. So you need to be able to dismiss it and look around what you want and then reopen it. So this is an example of a mobile app where you can't dismiss the keyboard. This is Trello, where you can't dismiss the keyboard, but you're not actually on a form or any kind of field, so that you can't even escape out of it. It just shows up there. And as you can see, it takes up a whole lot of room. Then there's this thing we named it the hover trap. This is where you have desktop-specific sites that are shown on mobile. And if you mouse over them on a desktop, you get this beautiful zoomed-in portion. So you see this a lot in clothing sites. What happens on a mobile is if you touch the item, it gives you that zoomed-in portion on the right, but there's no way to close that. So you can't actually get that image to ever disappear on a mobile. So we call it a trap because, like a keyboard trap, you have to close the browser and start again. So it's very serious. We also have come across VoiceOver swipe traps. We never had problems with VoiceOver until we started testing it on mobile. So this is LinkedIn. This is a status update. Basically, you are stuck on the arrow. There's basically nothing on the page, really. You can't dismiss the page. You can't access the keyboard. You can't move back. You cannot do anything. With VoiceOver, your only option is to close the browser and start again. YouTube also has a VoiceOver swipe trap, which is slightly different. Basically, what happens is you're stuck in the search bar. The rest of the content is grayed out, And if you're a visual user, you can tap on that content and it becomes the top layer. But if you're a VoiceOver user, you cannot get to that content at all. So you're stuck in the search bar. Just because, I just feel like I should pick on all the social media networks. The Facebook friends list, you can open the Facebook friends list with VoiceOver, but you should be able to swipe to go backwards, and you can't. You're stuck in your friends list. So, and this is a touch trap. This was impressive. So you can't actually move the screen. So you can't, slide, scroll. The only way to move the screen is to activate this little arrow at the bottom that doesn't meet color contrast requirements, and that throws you to the top of the page. So we call that a touch trap. Mobile issues. Okay, so Coles. I actually ran this presentation, and I have a couple of examples from Coles. Coles is kind of like your Walgreens. And Coles is notoriously inaccessible. There are two major supermarket chains in Australia, and Coles is one of them. The day after I ran this presentation at Future of Web Design in New York, Coles, there's a lawsuit started in Australia against Coles for their site not being accessible to vision impaired people. The problem with this app is that you have these buttons down the bottom, and it says lists, specials, product finder, more. And they're coded as buttons, but they don't have any alternatives. So VoiceOver reads them as button, 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 button. Access. So you need to make sure that you specify your inputs correctly. So for some reason, Elance have decided that they're going to create their own little drop-down that doesn't follow any HTML rules whatsoever. So you can only choose 14, 15, 16, or 17 because it's recognized as a keyboard input field, but there's actually a select that you need to do. So if that had been coded as a select, then the mobile would have recognized it as such and would have shown it to you in a much friendlier way. Text size is probably my biggest one. I actually can read very small text size, but this is ridiculous. This is Etsy, and it looks like maybe 4 point. And there's no way to increase the size. This, probably my favourite. No, actually Coles is my favourite. So this here is the app that you get when you fly from Australia to Los Angeles using Virgin Australia. And down the bottom here is your longitude and latitude, how many hours you've been flying, how long till you arrive, etc., etc. But this text is so small that you cannot actually, I can't read it on a mobile phone, and it doesn't allow pictures. So someone built this, someone designed it, someone coded it, and at no point did they actually look at it on a phone to determine that it was unreadable. So when you have text size, you need to make sure that if you're going to support the system settings in the phone, that they make sense. So this here is the iPhone with its smallest text size, and this here is the iPhone with its largest text size. So you can see that accessibility odds is basically cut off. So if you're going to support the system settings in your phone, make sure you test with those system settings. This is another example where basically the Discovering Cuisine and Open for are cut off. And this is, even Apple couldn't get it right because this is the part where you actually increase the text size. So on the lowest, it says apps that support dynamic type will adjust to your preferred reading size below. And then when you put it on its largest, it goes apps that support die, ... because there's not enough room for it. So they have actually fixed that particular error. Okay, so then you do see mobile apps that have large text or have a way to increase large text. So you can see that that's not really large text. That's moving from a size 8 font to maybe a size 10 font. That's not large text. In-app settings, so BBC News, for example, doesn't support the system settings in an iPhone. but they have their own feature to increase text size. But if you look at it, that's not really particularly large. That's going, once again, from maybe a size 6 font to maybe a size 11 or 12 font. This is the ABC website. Once again, small is very, very small, maybe 2 or 3 points, and large is maybe 12 or 14 points. But the important thing is that this is the small font and that's the large font. So your titles and your who's written it and your captions are all the same size no matter what setting you've selected. And you'd think that maybe the title would be one of the most important things that you want to make large. Colour contrast. Grey text on a white background is a bad idea. Hardly anyone can read it. We do use the testing. People don't know everything about that search bar is grey text on a white background. If they don't see it, then they won't know where to put their search. Now, this is Amazon. You know, basically, this is the way that people are going to find things. And yet it's grey text on a white background. Grey text on a grey background, search eBay, is also bad. But probably worst is LinkedIn, which is like a medium grey text on a light grey background. And this is just how close these people are to you in terms of your profile. So Carl Romansky is a 1st degree, Jake Mitchell is a 2nd degree. That's kind of information that I, as a specialist, might want to know. I might want to say, okay, I want to reach out to Steve Lee. Oh no, I'm already a 1st level person. Well, if I can't tell because of the colour contrast, then that's information I'm missing out on. Colour alone is another problem. So today's date, marked in blue where everything else is black, you're assuming that people don't have colour contrast issues, but it's also something that probably won't get read aloud to your screen reader users. So this is, even worse because this would just be a little image and these would be coloured table data cells. So that information is not going to be available to a screen reader at all. Maybe this is my favourite example. So Kmart. Do you guys have Kmart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the Kmart website. And this here is a link. You activate that link and you get an empty page. You get an empty page because it links to a Flash catalogue. Flash is not supported on iOS devices and hasn't been or ever. So they obviously never tested this, but not just that. In all Western countries, iOS devices are by far the most popular mobile and tablet devices. So, at what point did anyone look at this and say, oh, it's not even loading? Zooming. Zooming is a big problem. People zoom a lot on mobile and tablet. This is Airbnb. As you can see, it just overlaps and underlaps and looks terrible. To the point where you can't even read some of the contents, to the point where you can't read anything at all. So you go, okay, fine, I know I'm on the mobile site, I'll just go to the desktop site. And then it loses all your information. So you can imagine you're searching for something, you just want to zoom into something, it crashes, you go to the desktop site and you've lost all your data. Functionality unclear. So is this one way or is it return? So, using colour alone to convey information is problematic, but even if one was underlined and not underlined, it's still a little bit unclear. Now, it's going to be unclear for the general public. It's definitely going to be unclear for people with disabilities. This one, I can buy a warehouse trailing floral dress. I can select from 0, ... Now, I'm not going to buy this dress because I don't know what it is that I'm selecting. Sorry, now we've got Commonwealth Bank. So if you click on that, call Michael, it makes a phone call because you're on a phone. Very clever. So you think michael.decos@cba.co ... because the email address is so long that they can't fit it in, that maybe if you hit that, it would open your email. It doesn't do that. These email addresses that aren't even displayed properly are not active, whereas this is. Most people think that if you mark something as grey, it means that it's inactive. So here you've got add a message, name, email, phone, postcode, all in a light grey on a white background. Almost impossible to read. So you assume they're inactive, but they are actually active if you tap on them. But of course, Voiceover can't catch them. It's also important to think about how people will use your systems and that they might use them differently to what you expect. So YouTube, for example, it's a responsive website. So if you increase text size, it will eventually turn into what you see on a mobile. Now, someone at YouTube has decided that if you're on the mobile YouTube website, at no point are you ever going to want to upload a video. So if you zoom in on the site, as in Control+, you lose your upload button and your notifications button. So you cannot, if you're zooming in, you can't upload a video to YouTube. This is Asana. Asana has this great feature called My Tasks. And this is how I get everything done. If it's not on My Tasks, it doesn't get done. Well, that's great, except for the fact that the mobile version doesn't have My Tasks. So how can I use it? So now we use Trello. This is Row, New York City. I put this example in because Future Web Design put me up on Row, New York City. And this is the mobile version, and this is the desktop version. So the mobile version has all your navigation, but then it's got this big image about how would you create your New York City, and it links off to how you get access to Times Square or how you go visit MoMA and all that kind of stuff. And none of that is in the mobile side. So you can imagine you're looking at, where you're going to stay, and you click through and you go, oh, yeah, excellent, that's great. And you're on your way to New York and check the mobile site to figure out where it is that you want to go, and that information's not there. Pixellation on Zoom. This is a mobile magazine, which you get for free if you fly Virgin Australia on a long-haul flight. They give you free access, assuming that you will love the magazine so much that you will buy it. And yet the books that it's promoting are so pixelated that you can't even tell what the title is. This is another example about your self-worth circle, and the only thing that is actually readable is the word negative. Source order. Source order is really important on mobile. So these are requirements on the WCAG 2. A lot of people aren't aware of them. So this is Lion King, Ticketek, or whatever your ticketing system is. And you think, okay, so you select those things, you hit find tickets. But there's a whole bunch of information that's underneath that button. Not many colour contrast, but especially the stuff about accessible tickets and how you have to go through a different process if you want an accessible ticket. But you wouldn't think to scroll down because it looks like a complete page. It looks like you've reached the end of the page. So be aware that no one's going to look past your submit buttons. To the point where I was using this on my tablet, and you can see that there's options for room number and last name, the continue button, or if you have an access code, enter it here. So I put in my room number and I put in my last name and I hit continue and it said you don't have access. I was like, no, but I do. So I put in my room number and I put in my last name and I hit continue. I said, but I do have access. I've got an access code. And I couldn't believe that I did not see, even though it was visible on the screen, because I was just concentrating on what was above the submit button. If that's something I do, then it's going to be even more serious for, say, a screen reader user who takes much longer to go through a page. They're expecting the end to be at the submit button, and that's where the end should be. This is another example. LastPass, I was purchasing internet access on this Virgin Australia flight. No, it wasn't Virgin Australia because they don't have internet on the flight. United. And I put in my email address and I put in my password and I hit login. And it said, no network connectivity detected. I was like, but I know it's in my phone. It shouldn't need network connectivity. What I had to do was select the option down the bottom underneath the submit button of login offline. Now, there are requirements for error suggestions and error descriptions in WCAG 2. In order for this to meet WCAG 2, you would need to say, no network connectivity detected. Would you like to log in offline? It makes sense, but people don't do it. And I probably did this process 3 or 4 times before I realised that that was there, and I could see it the whole time. Touch targets. So this is Twitter Epic, I think. And it's important that when you have an active element on a mobile, that it's a certain size. And these are not large enough. So they're what, maybe 4 pixels by 4 pixels, maybe 8 pixels by 8 pixels. The BBC has some great recommendations on size, but they are so small that you actually have to hit them several times before you actually activate one. This is my favourite. This is the Zoom of Doom. This is a Coles site. So this is basically a map that shows you where Coles is in Yeppoon, which is a long way from anywhere. But if you scroll, swipe in the map area, it moves the map. If you want to move the page, you have to manage to select this small white area around the edge of the map in order to move along the page. The other thing that you have to do with touch targets is you need to make sure they're activated on removal of touch, not on touch. So, Coles again. So let's say I just want to scroll at this point. If I hit scroll, if I swipe and I hit South Australia on that swipe, it will automatically jump to the South Australia stores, even though I might be using the swipe gesture. The other problem with this is that every single Coles store in Australia is listed on one page and there's no back to top. So there are thousands of stores listed here and there's no way to get back to the top of the page to choose another stage unless you scroll, and it took me 8 seconds. Spacing. Okay, so you really don't want to put your edit button right next to your mark complete button because they're opposite actions and people accidentally click things that they shouldn't click on mobile devices much more than they do on desktop. This is even worse. In order to get rid of this install Airbnb, you have to click this tiny little close button, which is about 4 pixels by 4 pixels. If you click anything else, it'll install the app. Then there's things like just lack of testing, which probably covers a whole lot of things that I've talked about today. But best of YouTube. Voiceover reads it as best of YouTube. This is Target, which is, I think you guys have Target too. So if you activate this little image of video games, it gives you this, your search for 566269557, 566268725, 566269440, 5662681 found 4 product results. Well, actually, no. This is Coles. This is a mobile website, and you can't actually read, the text at all. It's just squished. So no one looked at it. No one tested. This is where one of my favourite dress shops are, and I went, take me to the map, and it's taken me to the latitude and longitude, not the actual address. I think maybe the address is what I was after. This is Kmart. So according to Kmart, Australia consists just of Western Australia because the rest of it is off the screen. Same with dish.com. We deliver in Sydney and, well, I guess you deliver in Sydney. Drupal, so once again, you've got overlapping text. I mean, on a major iOS device, problem. Spelling mistakes, so 10 cafe customers that are more annoying. They're going to really annoy people on mobile much more so than on desktop. Now this one's interesting. This happened about 2 years ago. All of a sudden, there was HTML code in all the Facebook headings. And it lasted, the summit lasted for 2 hours. Crikey, it was like this. Crikey's kind of like our alternative newspaper. It was like this for about 2 weeks. So the heading is spam class equal quo, end spam, why sacrifice yourself, whistleblowers, ... Now what happened? It's not that everyone got together one day and said, let's put HTML code into our Facebook headings. It's that that's what they've been posting to Facebook, and Facebook changed something, and then all of a sudden that HTML code was showing up. Now some people picked up on it quickly, some people took 2 weeks. You don't want to post broken links. People don't like broken links. And this is, get to Los Angeles Airport. Wi-Fi internet access. Were you disconnected? Click here to reconnect. Time left, 24 hours, 0 minutes. This page will redirect, so content doesn't really make sense to have here. And all of a sudden, I don't want to give you my credit card details. You need to be careful with errors. Triplify.com, description, reference error, can't find variable, triplify map file. HTTP, www.triplify.com/js/displayresults.js.q, etc., etc. Give something meaningful to the users. This is Green Apple Books. I've got a library at home. I love real books. I can't read books on devices. This is the Green Apple Books mobile website. So they're having an open day and half the map is off the page, half the information is off the page. The same with their events, this specific mobile site. But if you went to their desktop site, it worked. So once again, you need to make sure you test these things. This is Qantas, just because I don't want to pick just on Virgin Australia. So this is where you choose where you want to fly to and from. Now Qantas flies everywhere. And so it says select city, and it starts at A, Aberdeen, Abidjan, Accra, Addis Ababa. It took me 12 seconds to scroll down to Melbourne. Okay, so that's all the things that you shouldn't do. Not all the things, but some of the things. So I want to talk to you about correct implementations. This is Twitterific. So it is actually large text, but it also allows you to change the colour. Now, it's interesting to note that people who have dyslexia actually like to reduce colour contrast. So even though people with certain vision impairments like to increase colour contrast, there's groups that want to do the opposite. So the ability to choose colour contrast is quite important. So your iMessage actually supports large text size. And this is our website. So you can see the main area, we've changed the colour contrast and things like that. It talks about outline, etc., etc. And you can zoom in so much that you only see two letters at a time. And there will be some people that need to have that level of zoom. This is State Library New South Wales. So you've got this old photograph of people in Melbourne or Sydney, and you can zoom in and still get quite good quality information. Also, when it comes to desktop, you can move the mouse around and see that it changes to indicate that something's active. You can't do that on a mobile. So you can't assume that people know, when there's more functionality. So these people, have put this little tap text to indicate that you can tap on that and it gives you more information. Not quite sure of the point of this, but it's still a good idea. This is The Guardian, and it has that little arrow icon, and it takes you to what you would think would be a larger version of the image, but is the same size. So I'm not quite sure why I did that, but it at least indicates that you can open that image separately. So this one has a done option on its keyboard, but it also has previous and next. So you can actually jump through your fields using the mobile. And correct inputs. So whoever coded that field coded it as a telephone field, and therefore the number keypad on mobile shows up. So this uses color and shape to indicate what dates you selected. You still would need to put some stuff behind to make sure it gets read properly by the screen reader, but by using changes in color and changes in shape, you're covering people who have color contrast issues as well. I mentioned the BBC Mobile Accessibility Guidelines. They're very easy to find. There are also a whole bunch of Oswiki accessibility fact sheets that are freely available, and Dennis has been tweeting about them all week. They're quite in-depth, especially the JavaScript one is incredibly in-depth with demos and stuff that you can use. And we also have this thing called Oswiki, which a lot of these errors came from. And if you'd like access, come and talk to me. As I said, you can get this presentation on a11yoz.com/2016mobile. And any questions? Yes?
One common thing I see is when an app displays a message on the screen.
It disappears on.
Yeah, I'm running into that, and I'm telling the developers, okay, if you're using the braille display, you won't be able to read it because the text is there.
Yeah, so we saw that once or twice, maybe 5 years ago, and then in the last 6 months, it's just everywhere now. So yeah, having errors disappear after a period of time is problematic. I think it's actually has to do with the use of HTML5 form elements. But yeah, it can be problematic. It's a very big issue.
I was dealing with it all day.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned about the unclear functionalities. I'm just curious, what would be the best approach to make it clear which button or tab is accurate? Would it be just changing the color as well as the shape of the button? What if they are tabs?
So the question is, how do you, for the people on the call, how do you indicate, I suppose, what's active and what's not, maybe on a tab or the one-way versus return? It depends on what you're using. Tabs, it's a little bit easier because there's a whole bunch of ARIA roles around tabs that'll get read to screen readers. So you know that that'll be read properly to at least one group of people. There are things that you can do like a little arrow, for the tab that you've got indicated, if you have it in blue with a little arrow that points down. I've seen that happen a few times. Also, repeating the content as headings. So if you had one-way return and then somewhere just said one way, that's another way of doing it. Yeah, I'll see if I can, there might be some examples in Oswiki, let me know. I'll see if I can find it.
I think it was like an autoplay feature, or like I think it was an enlarged image feature that you showed earlier in the slideshow. You were saying that one of the accessibility problems for that is that like it would take up too much space. So would that take up too much like data usage as well on a cell phone as well?
I think you're probably talking about movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so Facebook is the perfect example of this. The autoplay video function on Facebook chews through data. So, firstly you've got movement that can't be stopped by the user, which is one of those non-interference clauses, but also it uses a whole lot of data, a whole lot of bandwidth. So yeah, definitely would be a problem.
Okay, yeah.
Any other questions?
And with larger institutions in this country anyway, you tend to have your developers overseas, primarily in the Asian countries. And in my function as a designer, I'm never going to know all of this. Is there a wiki that you have that is specifically for designers to be aware of? Because, communicating with Asia is
difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, Oswiki can definitely be used by designers, but it is definitely more aimed at those developers. I have written a couple of articles about accessibility in the web development lifecycle. So I've talked a little there about what to do in design. I do have a blog post on design as well. But yeah, so have a look at the resources section of our website. Yep.
There was one thing that you would say, or that continuously pops up, and like I know that everything you do is important as far as accessibility, but is there one thing that like stands out more that you should say as well? Even if you at least do one thing, what would you say would be?
Make your site keyboard accessible. Because if your site's keyboard accessible, then at least theoretically all the features will be available to assistive technologies. They might not be read out properly, but at least they're all there.
You mentioned earlier that using HTML5 form elements would not be a good idea in regards to accessibility. Is there any sort of like other HTML elements or HTML5 tags?
So I'm glad that you said that. So definitely use HTML5. HTML5 is fantastic. Yeah. It has some problems, but you can't rely on HTML5 to meet WCAG 2 for you. So a lot of people, for example, one of the requirements of WCAG 2 is that you need to indicate where your users have not completed a field. If you just rely on the equals required option of HTML5, then it'll just pop up and it'll disappear. It's probably what this guy's been dealing with. So you can use HTML5 and then use that required equals required, but you also need to code in, you know, if this field is missing information. Okay. Yeah.
But is there any tags within HTML5 that you would say that wouldn't be recommended as accessible? Because I know that you were talking about with the form element or with the form tags element in HTML5 that would cause accessibility problems.
So
somewhat.
There is a fact sheet on HTML5, but I've been told that it's out of date, so we haven't looked at it lately. One of the things that I disagree with HTML5 is the removal of the summary attribute on tables. But what I would say in general is anything that you can do in HTML5 that you can't do in HTML4, you need to code that in separately until the browsers have a better way of interpreting HTML5 elements. But placeholder is also another problem. It's how people use it. So a lot of people, instead of having a field label, a visible field label, will put the field label as a placeholder using HTML5. That's not the technical way that you should use it. It's also incredibly inaccessible. So it's more how people are applying HTML5 than HTML5 itself. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
I have a question about image size. You mentioned zooming in. So, but if you're actually trying to scale for devices, how do you go about doing that? Too large of an image for that much data versus the ability to use it.
Yeah. You just have to be very careful with breakpoints, and you need to do a lot of testing. So you should really, when you're designing a responsive site, design each breakpoint. So design at the desktop size, design at the 960 by 768 or whatever, and know that that's how your site is going to break at those points. And that way you'll have a design that needs to be followed for certain sizes.
But I mean more in terms of the data. So
yeah.
Really don't want to put.
So you can. I'm not technical. I'm not a developer. I don't know how that would work actually. It could be something that you. I don't know, it depends on what people like. You might know that there are certain images that people zoom in on, or certain content. But yeah.
Well, yeah, there are new picture elements. I think the picture element is for more art direction, but the source set attribute that you can use on the images, on the image tag will let you define buy a different image for different screen resolutions. I don't know if it that's what kind of bandwidth the user is using, but at least it detects what screen resolution the user is using. It's the correct image based on that.
Right, but then if you want to zoom, so the thing is that zooming, so like you have source that's set for the same device, but just for the smaller image.
That's
Yeah.
going to the image you could zoom in on.
Yeah, that's cool. Good. I'm glad someone figured out what that's for.
Yes, I want to use it, so I would select, yes, I don't mind using that.
To see the
View
full
a
image.
larger image, but like
But I'm just talking about just images in general, not all the devices are going to have that option.
It also depends on the content that's in the image. If it's an ornamental image of a couple of people having coffee, then people aren't likely to zoom in on it. If it's, your logo or your mission statement or something like that, then, so maybe that would inform the size. You have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, this is all mostly concerning mobile devices like phones, tablets, but now there's around the corner more like the wearable devices too.
Yeah.
And do you have any opinion or speaking about that and how to deal with?
Yeah, if my job wasn't interesting before, it is going to be soon. Wearables are very interesting. I think that people will have to accept that there are just going to be some wearables that are not going to be useful to them. So, for example, someone who's deaf might find, a smartwatch very helpful. Vibrates when you get an email, vibrates when you get a call, that kind of stuff. But I think that there's probably just going to have to be an acceptance that a smartwatch is not necessarily going to be all that helpful to a screen reader user. Yes, please.
Well, actually, you can use Apple Watch, and there are people that are working on, one instance, one company in Korea is working on a watch with a small braille display that pairs with your iPhone, so the iPhone provides the speech output through Voiceover.
Yeah, and I see a lot of people with vision impairments just hang their braille display around their neck, so it kind of operates in that way anyway. Yeah. You want to tell something?
I was just gonna ask a question based off of what he was saying about wearable devices. I was wondering, can some wearable devices be coded in HTML5, or would it depend on just the wearable device?
I think it would depend on the wearable device. I would expect that at some point there'll be wearables that are HTML that show websites.
Is there any country that you've noticed is the
Look, Australia was really good. About 5 years ago, they released this thing called the National Transition Strategy, which said basically if you don't meet your accessibility requirements, which is WCAG 2, we're going to turn your domain off. So that's a pretty serious thing. They never actually did that. And then people realised that they were never actually going to do that, and so people kind of gave up on accessibility. In a lot of ways, the US understands accessibility a lot more in terms of things like the need for automated accessibility testing tools, the need for a university developing policies and procedures and things like that. We're still at a stage in Australia of meeting with universities and saying, so let me explain to you what web accessibility is. So the US is leading the way, and one of the reasons is litigation. Yes?
Oh, there is.
What's your name? Sorry.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, Dan.
Dan. Okay, so I'll just say.
Sorry, I'm just.
Yeah, I know you introduced him before.
The problem in the U.S. though is that Congress will pass laws or there'll be executive orders, and then the Justice Department steps in and says, "Oh, we need to get public comment, or we need to do rulemaking," and things get delayed for years and years.
Well, I think it was very interesting that the Department of Justice is sending out letters of accessibility complaint referencing WCAG 2, even though WCAG 2 is not on the law books. It's still Section 508, but in reality, you need to be following WCAG 2, which of course is a problem because it doesn't cover mobile very well. Yep.
About making a business case for accessibility in a company, where does accessibility provide the best, the biggest benefits? Outside of what we kind of know the obvious. With SEO or everything else, have a quick kind of push and say, you know, it would also benefit doing this other way.
So definitely Google rankings. So not so much optimization, but if you have an accessible site, it's going to be able to be scanned better by Google. So for example, and it's going to be ranked higher by Google. So video sites that contain videos that had transcripts earn 16% more revenue than sites that had videos without transcripts. That's basically because Google could search the transcript and rank them higher, whereas Google can't search a video. Completion of a video, like watching it till its end, doubles if that video has captions. One of the things that the BBC found out was that 80% of people who turn on captions are not deaf or hard of hearing. They call it the Broadchurch effect. It's basically TV show Broadchurch. The accents were so strong, England couldn't understand what they were saying. But it's also a thing like I, spent 10 minutes looking at my Facebook feed this afternoon, and I was in Starbucks and I didn't want to play the video, and I wasn't going to watch a video unless it had captions. So there's a whole lot, and also a page that has video will be ranked much higher by Google than a page that doesn't have video. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things around that.
Do you have a good example of a site that gives users choice about their experience? For example, what kind of contrast they would like to have when they're visiting the site today?
We worked on Anti-Discrimination Commission Queensland, and I believe they have options for colour contrast and text size. And they, and they also won an Australian Web Award.
I'm working with a vendor and I was trying to explain this concept and they couldn't get the idea, and I thought I would show them one.
We did some work with Griffith University in Queensland, and their corporate colours are red and white, and they decided that instead of just giving users the option to increase the colour contrast, that they give users the option to choose their own colour contrast. And they found that I think it was something like 82% of people who use the colour contrast feature actually reduced colour contrast. So I'm not sure if this is going to work. So you're up the top, you've got your colours. So you can choose the different colours. You've got text size, and you've also got browse aloud. As I mentioned, we're no longer a reseller, but it is a great product. It allows you to, basically it's a screen reader, a screen magnifier, it changes colour contrast, everything. So there's a whole lot of things that it can do. Yeah.
And that is accessed with the button in the upper right?
Yep, this thing. And you can pick it up and it stays there.
And it's sticky.
Yep, it's sticky. So if you, let's see if it wants to work for me.
So you're in fact creating almost a white label effect for every user.
Yeah, so this is the like the text version only. And then it my volume is off. So it reads aloud and it
zooms the. Oh, I can't turn my volume on for some reason, but it is reading it aloud, and it's zooming it at the top as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things that Browse Aloud can do. It's aimed really at people with moderate vision impairments. So even though it has a screen reader, it's not for people who are completely blind, and it's also aimed at people with cognitive disabilities. So they found that comprehension of a web page, that is a study, comprehension of a web page increased by 18% when people use Browse Aloud versus just reading the web page. And it's quite useful because you don't have to identify as a person with a disability and go off and find an assistive technology. If that button is on your website, people might play with it and find it helps them without, having to go through that process. And it also is aimed at people with English as a second language, so it can translate into a whole bunch of different languages as well. Browse Aloud. So it's got a whole bunch of highlight themes, and I haven't checked the new one, so I can't tell you all the things that it can do.
Is that something you have to pay for?
Yes. If you want more information, feel free to contact me, because we did just implement it on the Rooted in Rights website for Disability Rights Washington. We just built them a website. So we can get you in contact with the right people. Any other questions?
Is that work as a plugin then?
It's basically JavaScript code that sits on top of your website. Yep. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.